The entire cafe seemed to fall into a brief hush in that moment as a stranger, with deep, hollow eyes and an appearance as though she had stepped out of a mysterious tale, placed a thin envelope on Naomi's table. Before she could even process what was happening, the stranger leaned in and whispered, her voice soft yet unmistakably firm, "You're going to need this tonight." The words rang in Naomi's mind like a warning bell, pulling her out of the fragile sense of peace she had carefully constructed over the past year. This cafe, a quiet spot on the edge of the city, had become her refuge after her husband's sudden death. Every Saturday afternoon, she came here, sitting alone with a warm cup of coffee, letting herself drift in the faint scent of cinnamon and baked pastries, in a place where no one asked about her past, about the things she refused to revisit. But today, everything had changed. That envelope was the first sign of something coming, something Naomi could not even begin to imagine. Naomi looked down at the envelope, then up at the stranger, but the woman had already turned away and disappeared as if she had never been there. All that remained was Naomi, sitting in silence with a strange unease, her hand tightening around the envelope as she wondered whether this was merely a coincidence or something far more serious waiting ahead. She could not shake the feeling that something big was about to happen and that somehow it was all connected to her. She tried to push the uneasiness aside as her son Lucas and her daughter-in-law Marissa approached. They sat down across from her, their faces clearly tense, as though they were trying to hide something. Marissa spoke first, her voice overly gentle, as if attempting to calm an unseen current beneath the surface. "Mom, maybe you should reconsider selling the land. We don't want you taking on any more burdens." Lucas, his eyes distant, simply nodded in agreement. They were right, and yet Naomi felt something inexplicable creeping into her thoughts. She had lived here for 40 years, tending to that land in a way no one else could replace. But now, under the weight of Lucas and Marissa's gaze, she found herself questioning everything she had once believed. As they stood up to pay, Naomi could not help but notice the glance they exchanged, quick and subtle, as if there were a plan she could not quite grasp. Not now, but soon, she told herself. She could not ignore it, could not pretend she hadn't seen the signs. They did not care about her the way they claimed. They only cared about the land that had sheltered her life, but was now pulling her into a game she was not ready to play. Naomi remained seated, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her bag, her eyes drifting back to the envelope still resting on the table. She could feel a chill in the air, as though someone were watching her every move. She didn't want to dwell on it, but the truth was she couldn't stop the fear from growing. The image of the strange woman lingered in her mind. It could all be coincidence, but deep down, Naomi knew that not all coincidences were truly accidental. By the time she stepped out of the cafe, the evening had begun to settle in. Her son and daughter-in-law drove her home, the entire ride unfolding like a slow-motion film. They spoke about the weather, about property prices, things that held no real meaning for Naomi. She simply listened to the hum of the car on the road, feeling the quiet turmoil inside her. They dropped her off at the entrance to the dirt road leading to her house, declining her invitation to come in. Not because they didn't want to, but because they were hiding something Naomi had yet to understand. As she stood there watching their car disappear into the darkness, a shiver ran down her spine once again. The sense of being watched refused to leave her. Her home, the place that had witnessed years of both happiness and sorrow, was beginning to feel unfamiliar, filled with tension and unease. When the door closed behind her, Naomi felt a shift in the air. The sense of safety the house once held was gone. The envelope remained in her bag, a quiet reminder that something was about to be revealed. But would Naomi have the courage to face it? She sat down at the kitchen table, her hand resting lightly on the envelope. For a long time, she did not dare open it, not because she was afraid, but because she feared that once she did, there would be no turning back. Everything would change. The truth she had tried so hard to avoid might finally come to light, and the question remained, would she be able to bear it? Naomi stood in silence in her small kitchen, staring at the envelope on the table, a surge of indescribable emotion rising within her. She wanted to open it, to decode the message it carried. Yet she couldn't bring herself to do it. The moments stretched on endlessly, each of her sighs echoing through the stillness of the room. It wasn't that Naomi feared the truth. It was that she feared she wouldn't be able to bear what it might reveal. She had always sensed that something was wrong within her family, but she had never dared to face it. She had spent her entire life hiding behind gentle words laced with calculation. And now, perhaps, it was finally time to open her eyes and see everything clearly. Just as the silence in the house seemed to settle in completely, Lucas and Marissa appeared again. This time, they arrived earlier than usual, and Naomi could clearly feel that something had changed. They were no longer the loving, caring children she once knew. They felt like strangers, coming with a clear purpose to push her out of this land. "Mom, you really should reconsider selling the land," Lucas said, his voice soft but unable to conceal the concern beneath it. He was still her son, still carried that gentle gaze and warm smile, but Naomi knew it was only on the surface. Behind it was something unseen, a calculation she could not yet decipher. "We're worried about you, honestly. Maybe not now, but later on, things could become very difficult," Marissa added, her voice as sweet as ever. But Naomi could sense the insincerity in her words, a pressure that was impossible to fully hide. Naomi simply smiled, a smile she had perfected over the past year. "I don't need to sell. Everything is still fine," she replied, trying to remain calm. But inside, a storm was rising. Do I really need to sell, she wondered. She had lived on this land for 40 years, cared for it, protected it, and now they wanted her to give it all up. Marissa and Lucas stood up, preparing to leave. But before they did, they exchanged a glance, one that Naomi recognized instantly, a look as if they were certain she would not be staying much longer. She began to question whether their concern was truly for her, or simply a way to take what they wanted. A strange feeling spread through her, as though they were planning something she could not see. Naomi remained seated, gripping her handbag tightly, feeling as though something in her life was beginning to shift. Everything felt wrong. She looked at the envelope on the table once more, then quietly slipped it into her bag. She couldn't let Lucas and Marissa see it. She didn't want them to know she was worried, didn't want them to see that she could sense the truth waiting ahead. At that moment, Naomi decided to walk around the house to ease the tension. She passed through the gardens that had once been full of life, where she and her husband had spent so much time together, tending to the plants and sharing laughter. Now everything felt eerily still. The dry, brittle branches, the withered flower bushes, all seemed to say one thing. This was no longer the peaceful place it once was. She turned back and stepped inside, but no longer felt the warmth the house used to bring. As the door closed, Naomi felt a coldness seep deep into her bones. She couldn't explain it, but it felt as though she was being watched, as if someone was tracking her every movement right inside her own home. Naomi could no longer continue living in denial. She could clearly feel that it was time to face the truth. Everything had its reason, and the signs were leading her down a path she could no longer refuse. Lucas and Marissa would not stop. They were far too determined. But Naomi still did not understand the full picture. She felt that there was something much bigger, a secret she had to uncover, even if it meant sacrificing everything. She sat down again, her hands trembling as she held the envelope, overwhelmed by a feeling she could not put into words. She had never felt so weak, yet at the same time, never this strong. This was not just about the land. This was about her life, about what she could lose, and about what she was about to face. A decision had to be made, and she knew it would be one that changed everything. But was Naomi ready to face this truth? She did not know, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The small kitchen remained wrapped in silence, yet Naomi's mind refused to settle. Images of the strange woman, with her deep, hollow eyes and cryptic words, kept circling endlessly in her thoughts. The warning, "You're going to need this tonight," lingered like a deep cut, a mark that could not be erased. Naomi tried to push it away, but she felt as if she were standing at a crossroads with no way back. Everything around her seemed to be shifting with every passing moment. She took a long breath, feeling the chill in the air, and decided to step outside for a while, to find a bit of space, to escape the suffocating weight of this unease. She walked into the yard, listening to the wind whistling through the dry branches. This land had once been a place where she and her husband had spent countless hours together, tending to it with care, but now it had become a place that held silent pain. Beneath every tree, every patch of grass, there seemed to be an untold story, a secret she could not fully grasp. Naomi's steps came to a halt when she saw Lucas and Marissa's car parked at the end of the road. A wave of unease rose within her again, as if something was not right. It was strange. Why would they appear at this moment, unannounced, without invitation? She stood still for a moment, sensing that something was about to erupt. She didn't know what they would say, but Naomi understood one thing. This would not be an ordinary conversation. She turned back into the house, trying to steady herself. But the moment she opened the door, their eyes said everything. Lucas looked at her with concern, yet within his gaze was something Naomi could not name, a calculation, a sign she had begun to recognize long ago. Marissa, though still wearing her gentle smile, carried a sense of urgency in every movement. Everything felt as though it had been arranged for a negotiation, not for her benefit, but for theirs. "Mom, we need to talk," Lucas said, his voice lowered as if trying to conceal the tension beneath it. Naomi looked at her son, and the uneasiness that had been building returned all at once. She could not shake the feeling that all these gentle words were merely a cover for something far greater. "What is it, Lucas?" Naomi asked, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. She could already sense the trap being set, even if it was not yet fully visible. "It's about finances, Mom," Lucas replied, looking straight at her, though his eyes lacked complete sincerity. "You can't keep living like this forever. This land is too large, and we need to face reality." He spoke those words, but Naomi could not ignore that they were not just advice, they were demands, even veiled threats. Marissa stepped closer, placing a hand on Naomi's shoulder as if to reassure her. "We only want what's best for you," she said, her tone gentle, yet carrying an unmistakable pressure. "You can't carry all of this on your own. If you sell the land, we can help you have an easier life. Otherwise," she paused deliberately, then added, "it will be very difficult." Naomi stared at Marissa, then turned to Lucas. Their words felt like sharp arrows aimed at her heart, but Naomi had grown accustomed to such arrows. She had lived long enough to understand that sometimes the kindest words came with unseen intentions. She held back the pain rising within her and spoke calmly, even as her hands tightened. "I don't need you to decide for me. I know what I have to do." But Lucas did not stop. He stepped closer and took her hand, not to comfort her this time, but to assert control. "Mom, we have to face the truth," he said, his voice more resolute. "You've lived on this land for a long time, but things aren't the same anymore. It's time to accept that you can't hold on to things that no longer fit." Naomi felt anger beginning to rise, but she refused to react impulsively. She could not allow herself to lose control. No matter what, she was still Lucas's mother, and she had learned to restrain her emotions in moments like this. But in that instant, a thought flashed through her mind, one she could not push away. Could it be that Lucas and Marissa were the ones trying to take this land, trying to push her out and claim everything for themselves? Naomi could not ignore the feeling that they were hiding something far greater, a secret she had yet to fully see. She lifted her head and looked straight into Lucas's eyes, and in that silent moment, she realized something. The people she had loved and trusted the most were now the very ones who could take everything from her. Naomi could not remember how long she had been sitting in her kitchen, but when she looked down at the envelope still resting on the table, she knew the silence could not last forever. Time kept slipping by, and with every passing minute, her heart beat faster. It felt as though an invisible pressure was pushing her closer to the very thing she had been trying to avoid. She could clearly feel the cold in the room, even though winter had already settled outside. Yet the chill inside her was far more intense. The door was shut tight, and everything around her suddenly felt too quiet, too suffocating. She sat there, gripping the envelope with trembling hands, trying to steady herself. She knew that once she opened it, nothing would ever be the same again. But if she didn't, this unease would linger endlessly, wrapping around her until there was no escape. Naomi let out a slow breath, stood up, and walked toward the table, her eyes fixed on the envelope as if it held an unimaginable secret. She hesitated for a second, then pulled it toward her and tore it open hastily, as if afraid the truth might disappear the moment she refused to face it. Inside the envelope was an old brass key and a small rolled piece of paper, nothing more, yet everything about it felt strangely familiar, disturbingly close. The paper contained a short, handwritten message, each letter carefully formed, unhurried, as though meant to keep something concealed. 20. Don't call back. A cold sensation ran down Naomi's spine. She held the key in her hand, its weight pressing down on her as if it were pulling her into a depth she could not escape. What could this key unlock? Was it part of a puzzle she had never known existed? And the numbers on the note, 2047, what moment did they point to? She began to feel as though she was falling into a maze with no way out, where every question only gave rise to hundreds more. She sat down, trying to suppress the confusion within her, but the unease would not fade. She knew she could not simply sit there, waiting for something undefined. She stood up, locking the windows and doors, as if protecting herself from something she could not yet name. Although this house had once been filled with warm memories, it now felt like a prison she had locked herself inside. It was getting late, and the sounds around her grew even more still. Naomi could feel the loneliness settling deep inside, yet she also understood that tonight would be the night she had to face the truth. There was no comfort left except herself. The key and the small note could not be mere coincidence. They were leading her closer to something she could no longer avoid. Time passed, minute by minute, second by second, like waves crashing harder and harder against the shore. She glanced at the clock. It was now 10:30. She could feel the tension in every breath, her heart pounding relentlessly. She knew there wasn't much time left before everything would become clear. 22:47, just over an hour away. The pressure weighed heavily on her shoulders. She stood up and paced the room, unable to sit still. Her thoughts swirled chaotically, pulling her in every direction. Then, in a sudden moment, she decided to do something she had never done before. She would call Lucas. She knew that in this state of panic, her son might be the only one who could help her make sense of at least some of these questions. But as she dialed his number, her hands trembled so much she could barely hold the phone. She stopped, as if a voice in her mind was telling her not to make the call. And then she remembered the words of the strange woman, the warning echoing in her mind. Don't call back. She took a deep breath and slowly lowered the phone. She would have to wait until the time came, wait until everything revealed itself. She could not allow herself to be consumed by panic. Yes, she had to wait. Time continued to pass, and with each second, the weight grew heavier. Naomi no longer felt safe in her own home. Fear began to rise within her, a kind of fear she had never known before. The footsteps of Lucas and Marissa seemed to echo in her mind, their gentle words hiding deception beneath them. She felt as though she was standing on a fragile line, where every decision could change everything. When the clock finally struck 22:47, Naomi felt as if everything had been set in motion. Then her phone rang, a sharp sound cutting through the silence of the room. She picked it up, but on the other end, there was only silence at first. No one spoke, only the steady sound of breathing, and then a strange voice emerged. "Naomi," the voice said, soft yet commanding. A chill spread through her once again. Naomi could never forget the moment when the phone in her hand began to vibrate, a sound slicing through the absolute silence of the kitchen. Everything around her suddenly blurred, as if all noise and movement had come to a halt, leaving only the steady trembling of the phone. She looked at the screen. There was no number, no name, just a dark display, like a reminder that the truth could come from anywhere, from anyone. She hesitated for a few seconds, then firmly pressed accept. There was only one thing Naomi could not have anticipated, the voice that followed. "Naomi?" The voice was strangely familiar, yet she could not place it. It carried a certain heaviness, as if trying to remain clear while struggling against an unspoken tension. Naomi felt her heart skip a beat. She tried to steady her breathing, but the chill rising inside her would not fade. The voice echoed in her mind, vivid, as if the speaker were standing right beside her. but that was impossible. Naomi, the voice continued, this time with a trace of urgency, yet still unmistakably clear. Your husband, he didn't die the way everyone said he did. Naomi's entire body went rigid. She could hardly believe what she was hearing, yet each word struck her like a hammer, tightening around her heart with every syllable. She gripped the phone tightly, her vision blurring with confusion. That's impossible, Naomi murmured. But in that very moment, the truth within those words pierced her like an arrow she could not pull free. She had always believed she understood everything, that her husband's death had been an unavoidable accident. But now, this voice was telling her otherwise. A wave of disorientation washed over her, as if everything around her was beginning to crack. Your husband found something on that land. He couldn't let it continue. That's why he started to change. He was afraid he wouldn't be able to protect you. The voice went on, each sentence cutting deeper into her thoughts. Naomi sank into a chair, her legs no longer steady. She bit her lip, trying to hold back tears. Who is this? She asked, her voice trembling but resolute. She refused to just listen in silence. She needed to know. She had to know. There was a long pause, then the voice returned, heavier now, as if weighed down by something unseen. It's me, Mark, the voice finally admitted. He didn't die in an accident, Naomi. He was murdered. The name Mark sent a shock through her. That was her husband's name, the man who had died over a year ago. It couldn't be. She could not believe what she had just heard. But the voice continued, word after word, without stopping. He discovered an illegal network tied to the land. Shady deals were happening in the shadows, and he decided to expose it. But they didn't want that. They knew he was going to reveal the truth. The voice faltered, as if struggling to hold back emotion. Naomi, you have to believe me. Everything he did, everything he prepared for you, it was all for you, to keep you safe. Naomi pressed her hand against her forehead, feeling as though she might collapse. She had lived with the pain of loss, with the belief that the past could not be changed. But now, everything she thought she knew about her husband's death was unraveling. Everything she had believed, every memory she held of Mark, was being dragged into a mire of doubt and deception. The voice came again, stronger this time, as if trying to pull her out of a daze. His death was not an accident, Naomi. He was pushed into a trap, and those people don't want you to know the truth. They won't let you be safe. Don't trust Lucas. Don't trust Marissa. At the mention of those names, a wave of suspicion surged through her. Her son and her daughter-in-law, could they have anything to do with her husband's death? The words were too heavy to ignore. She felt herself being pulled into a world she could not control, where the people closest to her might also be the most dangerous. Naomi tightened her grip on the phone, her heart pounding so hard she could hear her own breath. She felt as though she had been thrown into a battle she was never prepared for. Then, what am I supposed to do now? She asked, her voice edged with desperation yet firm with determination. What did my husband leave for me? The voice on the other end fell silent for a moment before answering. He prepared everything for you, Naomi. The documents, the evidence, it's all underground, beneath the land you're living on. You have to find it before they do. The call ended abruptly, without a goodbye, leaving only silence filling the space. Naomi sat still, staring at the now lifeless phone, feeling as though everything that had just happened was nothing more than a terrible dream. But in reality, it was a nightmare she could not escape. She could feel it clearly now. Her husband had not died in an accident, but for a dark reason she had yet to fully understand. She looked out the window, the faint light of the night seeming to extinguish whatever hope she had left. Everything had changed, and now she had to uncover the truth, no matter how much it threatened everything she had ever known. Naomi sat in silence, the faint glow of a desk lamp casting light across the workspace where papers and objects lay scattered without order. In those moments, it felt as though time itself had stopped, leaving only her and the pile of documents filled with uncertainty, filled with signs of a truth she had yet to reach. Her phone remained still after the unexpected call from the unknown voice. What she had just heard felt like a slap across her face, leaving her so shaken that she could no longer make sense of the events unfolding around her. Mark's voice still echoed in her mind. He had said her husband had discovered something important, that she needed to uncover the truth, not from the people closest to her, but from the very land they had lived on together. Naomi no longer felt safe the way she once had, when everything in this house was tied to warm family memories. Now it had become an invisible prison, a place where secrets could not be revealed, and where the truth itself might destroy her. She could not just sit there and wait. A sense of helplessness was taking over her mind, and Naomi knew the only way forward was to search for the truth herself. If what the caller had said was real, if what Mark had left behind could truly help her, then she had to begin now. But that meant facing things she had never wanted to see. She stood up and walked toward the filing cabinet, where she knew important documents her husband had left behind were stored. A strange feeling rose within her, as if every step was bringing her closer to something she could never turn back from. She pulled open the drawer and carefully went through each document. Every page she turned, every word she read, tightened something inside her chest. Everything she found appeared ordinary: property papers, purchase agreements, bills. And yet something felt wrong. Naomi could not explain it, but the feeling clung to her. Just as she was about to give up, a yellowed sheet of paper, worn as if it had been kept for years, caught her eye. Naomi carefully pulled it out, her fingers brushing against it as though touching something cold, something waiting to be uncovered. On the paper was a single handwritten line: "Look beneath the basement." That was all. A simple instruction, yet powerful enough to push her into a path with no return. Naomi stood there for a few seconds, her thoughts racing. The basement. She had never thought there was anything important down there. She could not even remember the last time she had gone below. It had been a long time. The basement had always been a neglected place, filled with old, unused things. But now, it felt like a secret buried for too long, one that only she could uncover. She walked quickly toward the door, determined not to hesitate any longer. Her chest tightened as she placed her hand on the basement door handle. A wave of cold ran through her as she opened it, revealing the dark staircase below. The darkness seemed to swallow everything. No light, only a heavy, unsettling emptiness. Naomi pulled a flashlight from her bag and turned it on, its weak beam illuminating damp walls she had long ignored. The basement was not only cold, but covered in dust, the smell of mildew thick in the air, making her want to hold her breath. Still, she moved down step by step, each movement weighing heavier on her. She did not know exactly what she was looking for, but what she had just found in the cabinet would not let her stop. She could not remain still and allow those hiding the truth to continue controlling her life. When she reached the bottom, Naomi looked around. The room was dark and cluttered, filled with things long forgotten. She took a deep breath, feeling the oppressive silence. She swept the flashlight across piles of old belongings, and then the beam stopped on an old wooden cabinet, one she had never paid attention to before. Naomi stepped closer and carefully pulled it open, and beneath it, she noticed something unusual. It was covered by a worn piece of cloth, shaped like a large box. A mix of tension and anticipation rose within her as she pulled the cloth away. Inside the box was a collection of documents, old photographs, and a vintage camera. But what caught Naomi off guard the most was a small notebook with a worn leather cover. She opened it, and instantly the pages inside nearly took her breath away. Detailed records of transactions, hidden bank accounts, and a long list of names she did not recognize. There were also photographs taken from concealed positions around the land she lived on, images of late-night movements, traces of secret dealings. Naomi stared at those pages, realizing that everything she had once believed to be peaceful and safe was now being exposed under the light. Her husband had known everything, and he had prepared it all for her. Everything he had done, everything he had documented, had a purpose. Naomi exhaled slowly, feeling as though she had stepped into a maze with no escape. She knew she could not stop. She had to keep going, because there was no one else left to help her. Naomi climbed the stairs, the notebook in her hand feeling like a heavy stone weighing down each step. Every step seemed to pull her closer to a truth she had never wanted to face. The house now felt cold and silent, no longer carrying the warmth that once made her feel safe. Everything had changed since that strange phone call, and now she stood at a point of no return. She placed the notebook on the table and carefully opened each page, the dim light casting shadows over the uneven yet deliberate handwriting, filled with names and transactions she could not fully comprehend. The photographs inside, images of hidden activities she had never suspected, now felt like an open wound in her chest, exposing things she could never forget. Naomi sat still for a while, her thoughts tangled. She looked back on the land where she had lived for so many years, a place filled with memories of her husband, a place she once believed was safe, but now revealed as the center of a dark network she could not fully understand. She could not continue living in fear, but she also could not face the truth alone. It felt as though a storm was approaching, and she knew that the people closest to her were the ones pushing her straight into it. At that moment, the front door opened, and the familiar sound of Lucas's footsteps echoed down the hallway. Naomi did not need to see his face to recognize him. A wave surged inside her, as if something was about to shatter. Lucas, her son, the one she had spent her entire life raising and protecting, was now part of a plan she could not accept. The kitchen door opened. Lucas stepped in, his face calm as always, but Naomi immediately noticed the change in him. There was no longer the gentle gaze of a devoted son, only something unfamiliar, a look that suggested he was in control of everything around him. "Mom, what's going on?" Lucas asked, his voice soft, yet Naomi could sense the strain beneath it. He avoided her eyes, looking down as he adjusted his shirt, as if trying to regain control of a situation slipping from his grasp. Naomi stared at him, her eyes cold, filled with suspicion. "Lucas, do you know what's happening? Why are you doing this? Why are you pulling Marissa into this?" she asked, each word carrying a pain she could not hide. Lucas stood still, his eyes uncertain but not retreating. "Mom, we just want to protect you. I just don't want you to worry about money anymore." He began pacing around the table, his hands brushing over the documents as if trying to ease the tension in the air. Naomi felt the pain inside her rise like a wave. She stood up and walked toward him, no longer able to remain calm. "Protect me? Or take everything from me? You don't understand, Lucas. This land is not just property. It's memories. It's everything your father left behind. And you want to sell it as if it means nothing?" Her voice hardened, each word cutting through the deception she had failed to see before. Lucas fell silent for a moment, then finally spoke. "Mom, land can't live like people do. It can't feed you or support you while everything out there is changing. I don't want to see you carrying burdens you can't manage anymore." He paused, meeting her eyes, as if trying to convince her. Naomi looked at her son, feeling as though something inside her had been struck. Why was he saying these things? She felt betrayed. Everything she had believed in was collapsing. Her son was no longer the child she had raised and protected. Lucas had changed, and she could no longer recognize him. But what hurt Naomi the most was that she could not understand why he was doing this, what his true purpose was. Before she could even catch her breath, Marissa stepped into the room. She did not ask questions, did not hesitate. She and Lucas stood there, silently watching Naomi. Marissa's eyes carried a coldness Naomi had never seen before. Naomi felt surrounded, with nowhere left to run. "Mom, we told you. We only want to help you," Marissa said, but her voice no longer sounded like someone close. It was cold, calculated. "We just want to protect you from mistakes you don't even realize you're making." A chill ran down Naomi's spine. She knew she could not remain silent any longer. "You don't need to worry about me. You are the ones who should be worried." Her voice was firm, her heart pounding harder than ever. Suddenly, Lucas stepped closer, his gaze shifting, no longer concerned but cold and resolute. "Mom, don't make this harder for us. If you don't agree to sell, we'll have to go further. And you know where that could lead." Those words struck Naomi like a blow to the heart. She could not believe her own son was saying this. But deep down, she knew it could be true. They were no longer her family. They were strangers willing to sacrifice everything to gain what they wanted. Her hands felt cold, but she could not hesitate any longer. She looked straight into Lucas's eyes, no trace of weakness left. "You've gone too far." Her voice was sharp, filled with anger and resolve. "I won't let you destroy me again, no matter what you try." Lucas and Marissa stood in silence, unable to respond. Naomi could feel the shift in the air. This was the moment she had to stand her ground, to face the truth, no matter how painful it was. She could no longer live in fear. Naomi could not sit still for even another minute. The suffocating weight inside the house rose in waves, like tides crashing relentlessly against the shore. The words of Lucas and Marissa still echoed in her mind, but they no longer sounded like the voices of people who loved her. They felt like sharp arrows aimed straight at her heart. She felt trapped in a vortex with no clear way out. But one thing she knew for certain, she could not stand still and let everything unfold according to their will. As darkness settled around the house, Naomi felt the loneliness closing in from every side. She walked to the table where the documents she had found were laid out, where buried secrets had begun to surface. The small notebook, the photographs, the detailed records, all of it painted a picture she did not want to see, yet could not ignore. She realized she had been pulled into something far bigger without ever knowing, and now she had to face the consequences. The photographs in the notebook made it impossible for her to stop thinking about one thing. Could the people closest to her be involved in all of this? Could Lucas and Marissa truly be connected to Mark's death? Naomi had once believed her husband's passing was an unavoidable accident, but now she could not stop questioning whether the truth was something far more brutal. A cold pain spread through her chest, numbing her thoughts. This land, the place where she and Mark had built their life together, had now become a hiding place for deadly secrets. Naomi stood up, determined not to let anyone control her life any longer. She had to find the truth. She could not hesitate anymore. She went down to the basement once again. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she could not turn back. She could not stop. The basement was no longer just a place for old belongings. It was where Mark had hidden secrets from her, things that could change everything. Naomi walked toward the wooden cabinet she had discovered before. The feeling that there were still clues hidden beneath that worn cloth would not let her stop. Every step in the darkness brought her closer to the truth, and she knew this truth would not be easy to face. She pulled the cabinet open forcefully this time, without hesitation, without fear. Everything was moving toward a point of no return, and Naomi knew she could no longer move forward blindly. Inside, the documents were neatly arranged, alongside old, crumpled photographs. She flipped through them one by one, seeing scenes she had never known existed. Nighttime images of unfamiliar cars parked near the family land, shadowy figures moving in the dark. She studied the faces in the photos, and a cold sensation crept into her chest. One photograph made her stop. She stared at it, her hands trembling. In the image was a group of people standing near the forest behind the house, holding objects she could not clearly identify. Naomi recognized one of them. It was Lucas. Her heart tightened. How could her son be in these photographs? She had not seen the change in him before, but now the evidence was right in front of her. This could not be coincidence. It was proof, undeniable proof that Lucas knew about the hidden dealings surrounding this land, and that he had been involved. Naomi could not believe her eyes. It felt as though the world around her had collapsed. The person she had raised and loved for so many years was now part of something dark, something she could never have imagined. She continued searching through the cabinet and found a small letter, sealed with a thin layer of foil. When she opened it, the first line took her breath away. They won't stop until they have everything. It was a warning, a message from Mark, something he had known, a truth he had not been able to stop. She forced herself to read on, her hands shaking from the tension. They won't stop, Naomi. If you want to survive, you have to find what's hidden beneath this land. Not everything you see is the truth. We have been deceived from the very beginning. The pain inside her grew sharper, more unbearable. The final words in the letter struck her like a shock, like a prophecy she could not escape. What she was doing now was no longer just about uncovering the truth. She was facing people she had once trusted, and now she had become their target. She took a deep breath, stood up, and looked around. There was no way out, no choice left except to keep going, no matter what dangers lay ahead. She knew this path would not be easy, but if she stopped, everything would remain buried beneath the ground forever. She could not let her husband's sacrifice be in vain. She had to continue. Naomi stood quietly in the living room, staring out the window. Night had fallen, yet the faint glow of the yellow lamp could not dispel the cold, heavy feeling that filled the house. She fixed her gaze on the swaying shadows of the trees outside, like ghostly figures, vague and unsettling. Everything around her now felt unreal, as if she were trapped inside a nightmare she could not wake from. The small notebook, the documents, the photographs in the basement, all of it painted a dark picture Naomi could hardly believe. What she had uncovered did not just change how she saw Mark's death, it forced her to face a terrifying truth. Her own family, the people she had loved and trusted, were the ones quietly manipulating her life. Lucas and Marissa were not simply concerned for her. They had another purpose, and it was not to protect her. She could feel the tension in the air, like standing at the edge of a cliff, not knowing when she might fall. She knew that if she did not act now, everything would slip beyond her control. They would not stop, she had realized that long ago. But now, Naomi could not continue living in this uncertainty. She could not keep waiting. She had to face the truth, no matter how painful it would be. Her mind churned, thoughts colliding like shattered fragments. She no longer knew what to do next. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, cutting through her thoughts. It was a sound she never wanted to hear at this moment. She stood up, her hand trembling as she reached for the doorknob. She took a deep breath to steady herself before opening the door. She knew things would not be easy, but she could not allow herself to be overpowered. The door opened, and immediately, Naomi found herself facing three people: Lucas, Marissa, and someone she did not expect, a police officer. Lucas looked at her with concern, but Naomi could sense the calculation behind his eyes. He was no longer the son she had once loved, but a stranger she could not understand. Marissa stood nearby, her face expressionless, yet Naomi could clearly see the tension in her posture. The officer stood silently beside them, saying nothing. A chill ran down Naomi's spine. Everything suddenly became clearer than ever. They were not here to help her. They were here to pressure her. They were doing all of this for the land, for something Naomi had always believed belonged to her family, but had now become an object of struggle. "Mom, we need to talk," Lucas said, his voice gentle, yet Naomi could clearly feel the force behind it. Naomi looked at her son, no softness left in her eyes, only cold determination. She could see the change in him, a change she had not recognized until it was too late. "What is this, Lucas?" Naomi asked, her voice no longer gentle. She could not let them manipulate her any further. "Mom, I told you, we just want to protect you," Lucas continued, his eyes fixed on her, each word now carrying a different weight. "You can't keep living like this forever. This land is too large. It's too much responsibility. You can't carry it all on your own anymore." She looked at Marissa, whose eyes now held a quiet defiance, without a trace of sympathy. Naomi knew everything she said was an act, a cover for plans darker than she could have imagined. Naomi took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. She did not want them to see fear in her eyes. "You don't understand," she said, her voice steady but firm. "I am not someone for you to decide for. This is my land, and you cannot force me to sell it." But Lucas did not stop. He stepped closer, his gaze scanning her as if measuring her, a look that sought control. "Mom, we have to think about the future. If you don't sell, things will go further, and you know what that means." The tension in the air grew heavier. Naomi looked at Lucas, his eyes no longer those of the son she had raised. He had become someone else, someone she could not trust. "You can't do this to me," Naomi said, her voice firm, though inside fear continued to rise. "I won't allow it." The officer standing beside Marissa stepped forward, his voice calm but edged with authority. "Mrs. Naomi, we've received information that you may be experiencing health and financial difficulties. We just want to ensure that you are not in danger." Naomi looked straight into the officer's eyes, her gaze filled with suspicion. "I don't need your help. I'm fine," she said, her voice no longer carrying any softness. The officer did not step back. "We are simply following procedure, ma'am. If you do not cooperate, we will have to proceed with further steps." Naomi felt her entire body tense, anxiety and fear rising within her. But in that moment, she realized something clearly. If she did not stand up now, everything would be lost. She could not continue living under the control of Lucas, Marissa, and the system quietly manipulating everything around her. Looking into the officer's eyes, Naomi understood that this was the moment. Either she acted, or she would be pulled into a spiral she could no longer control. She took a deep breath, her gaze settling on Lucas's face, and she spoke, her voice firm and unwavering. "Get out, all of you. I don't need your help." Naomi stood in the middle of the living room, her eyes fixed on the table where the notebook and documents still lay, not yet put away. Everything in the house now felt heavy and silent, filled with a weight that could not be hidden. The door had closed behind Lucas and Marissa, yet the sound of their footsteps still echoed in her mind. Their words, threats disguised as concern, cut into her heart like a blade. She could not believe it, yet she could not deny the truth. The people she loved most, the ones she thought would protect her for life, were the very ones betraying her. The meaning of family was no longer what she once believed. Her gaze settled on the notebook Mark had carefully hidden. She remembered every moment they had spent building this life together. But now, everything had been overturned, and she knew she could no longer live in lies. The secrets Mark had left behind were not just reminders of the past, they were signs, warnings of what would happen if she did not act now. Mark's words in the letter, his warning about those who were silently watching and manipulating her life, still echoed in her mind. She knew that if she did nothing, the truth would remain buried beneath the ground. She had let everything drift in uncertainty for far too long. But now, things were clear. This land, the secrets hidden deep beneath it, all of it was connected to the very people she trusted most. Naomi stood up, feeling that she was ready for whatever came next. She could not continue living in fear, could not stand by while her son did things she could no longer understand. Even though her heart ached when she thought of Lucas, she knew that if she did nothing, she would lose everything. She had once refused to face the truth, but now there was no other choice. She decided to call Claire, the woman who had helped her understand what was happening. She tried to stay calm, but anxiety rose quickly within her. Part of her still hoped there might be another way, a way that would not force her to confront the people she loved. But the moment the phone began to ring, she knew this was the moment everything would end. "Naomi?" Claire's voice came through the phone, calm but urgent. "Have you made your decision?" Naomi took a deep breath. "I have to. They've left me no choice. Lucas and Marissa won't stop, and I know that if I don't act, they'll destroy everything." She clenched her hand, feeling as though she was holding her own fate within it. "We'll follow the plan. Don't worry, Naomi. We'll help you," Claire reassured her, though there was a trace of concern in her voice. "Stay calm. If you make one wrong move, they'll know immediately." Naomi understood. She could not afford to make a mistake. This was the only path left to her. No matter how dangerous it was, she could not turn back. She ended the call and looked at the box Mark had carefully hidden. Everything she needed to end this nightmare was inside it. She had no choice but to follow the path Mark had prepared for her. With the box in her hands, Naomi stepped outside. She could feel a shift in the air, as if every step she took was pulling her towards something inevitable. Everything seemed to be closing in around her, and she knew time was running out. Those people would never spare her, and if she did not act now, she would lose everything. She walked into the yard and looked out over the land where she had lived her entire life. The feeling was strange. It was no longer a place of safety, but a field hiding dark secrets. She could not endure it any longer. She moved quickly toward the edge of the forest, the place Mark had always warned her to stay away from. But now she had no choice. She had to go there, where the unspeakable truths were waiting. Reaching a clearing, Naomi stopped. She knelt down and began digging into the soil with her hands. Her chest tightened, but she could not stop. Her nails scraped against the earth, aching with pain, yet she kept going. She had to find the truth, had to prove that Mark had not died in vain. She could not let him carry everything alone. Suddenly, her hand struck something solid. Her heart pounded harder, as if her entire body had come alive. She pulled it out, a box buried beneath the dirt. Opening it, she found documents, photographs, and a USB drive inside. The tension inside her rose even further. This was the evidence she needed. This was everything Mark had prepared for her. Naomi picked up the USB and stared at it. She knew this was the key to ending everything. All she had to do now was open it and face the truth. But was the truth something she could endure? She let out a slow breath, the beam of her flashlight illuminating the USB in her hand. Everything was clear now. There was no turning back. Naomi stood in the open space, looking out toward the old wooden door where the faint light of dawn was beginning to slip through the narrow gaps of the windows. The air inside the house felt heavy, yet at the same time, something seemed to have shattered and lifted away. She had stayed awake all night, going through the documents Mark had left behind, uncovering every secret her husband had sacrificed to protect her from. Now, with the USB in her hand and the truth laid bare, Naomi knew that a new chapter of her life had begun. There was no more fear, no more hesitation. She was ready. The past weeks had crashed over her like a relentless wave, crushing every emotion she had tried to hold on to. She had discovered the truth about Mark's death, about the secrets buried beneath the land she had lived on her entire life. Every warning from the unknown caller, every step she took in her search, had led her closer to a truth she had never imagined she would have to face. But she had done it. She had survived and stood firm in the storm her own family had created. With the USB in her hand, Naomi walked into her study, the place where she had sat countless times seeking comfort in old memories. Now there was no comfort left, only the truth and what she had to do next. She inserted the USB into the computer, each passing second stretching like a nightmare. The screen lit up, and immediately files and videos began to appear. She scrolled through them, reading every line in the emails, every detailed record of hidden transactions, watching videos that captured secret meetings. Each file felt like a piece of a puzzle, and every piece opened another door into a dark world she had never imagined. Images of Lucas, Marissa, and others in her family participating in illegal exchanges were all there, clear and undeniable. This was no coincidence. Her entire family had been pulled into a criminal network, and everything had been carefully documented by her husband, Mark. A wave surged inside Naomi. She did not know what to do with everything she had uncovered. The pain cut deep as she realized that the people she loved most had become her greatest enemies. But she also knew that if she did not act now, everything would be buried beneath the ground once again. This land, this family, could not continue living in darkness. The videos made the truth even clearer. One short clip showed a late-night meeting between Lucas and a group of strangers. Their voices echoed, speaking of one goal: to take the land, erase all evidence, and bury everything. Naomi could hardly believe her eyes as she watched her son involved in these dangerous dealings, conversations she had never known existed. Other footage showed Marissa meeting with unknown figures in the forest behind the house, discussing plans to sell the land, talking about partnerships with powerful figures in land trading. Both she and Lucas were deeply involved, everything they did driven by their own interests. What Naomi had once believed was concern and care from her family now revealed itself as a ruthless game of power. A sharp pain tore through her. She could not believe that her own son and daughter-in-law had pushed her into this position. But as she looked back, a clarity rose within her. She could not continue living in this darkness. She could not allow secrets to hide the truth any longer. She had to face it, not only for Mark, but for herself. Naomi stood up, determination in her eyes. She could not allow the lies to continue. She now had enough evidence to bring down those who had been quietly destroying her life. But she also knew this was not the end. She would have to face Lucas. She would have to face Marissa. They would not stop easily, and if she did not act now, they would continue to twist everything to their advantage. Naomi decided to reach out to those who could help her. She called Claire, the friend who had stood by her from the beginning, and arranged to meet and plan their next steps. Her heart felt heavy, but her determination made her stronger than ever. She knew the next step would be the hardest, but if she did not take it, she would lose everything. The next day, Naomi sat in her car, her eyes fixed straight ahead, filled with resolve. She refused to be a victim any longer. The months of living in fear had been enough. She would not let this betrayal destroy her again. She would fight, no matter the cost. She looked back at the house, the place that once held so many memories. It would no longer be her home, but she would not let it become a place where the truth was buried forever. She would make sure the world knew that the power of truth could never be hidden for long. And in that moment, as she walked toward the door, Naomi's steps carried no hesitation, no fear, because she knew that the truth, no matter how painful, was the only thing that would allow her to stand her ground. Thank you for following Naomi's gripping story. The secrets, the betrayals, and the intense confrontations have taken her on a journey with no way back. Will she be able to overcome everything and stand strong in the face of the truth? Share your thoughts about this story in the comments. If you enjoy emotional and suspenseful stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next episodes. Every story brings meaningful lessons about life, family, and inner strength. Will you be the next to uncover the unanswered mysteries in life? Join us as we continue the journey in search of truth and justice. Share this story with your friends and loved ones so they can experience these intense and inspiring moments with you. Thank you so much for being with us. Wishing you a wonderful day, and we'll see you again in the next stories.